Pass. Yeah. Okay. Councillors, I'll open the meeting with a prayer and invite you to accompany me. Almighty God, be with us as we work for the people of Shire. Grant us wisdom and may care for the Shire's true stewards. May be aware of the great responsibility on us. Help us to be just as we do. May our work prosper for the good of all. Amen. I'd also like to bid acknowledgement of country. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we are meeting. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and the Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here today. This meeting is being streamed but also recorded for just make sure the accuracy of the meeting. So just make sure you're aware of that. All councillors are present, so there's no apologies. Next item is item 6, confirmation of minutes of the ordinary meeting of the 3rd of February and the special meeting of the 24th of February 2021. Somebody moves. Councillor Berry, Councillor Minari. All those in favour? Kerry. Item 7, disclosure of interest, conflict of interest. Councillors, are there any conflict of interests for items on the agenda here tonight that councillors wish to disclose? Okay, thank you. Next item is item 8, public question time. We have several questions that have been raised by residents. The first one was Mr. John Kowalski, and the question there, and which we have there. So is there a response from somebody from Caroline, please?
So the question was, can council give its moral citizens an assurance that all council information that may be posted on commercial platforms such as Facebook or Twitter is easily accessible from the council's official website? So the response, council uses many communications channels to ensure our community is kept well informed, including social media, the council website, media releases, advertising, e-newsletters, letters to residents, and quarterly magazine or Moorabool magazine. Council uses social media platforms like Facebook to share emergency messaging, information that impacts residents, as well as general day-to-day operational material. Most of the content posted on social media links back to council's website, so residents are able to read more on the topic. Information not housed on council's website includes sharing emergency alerts for incidents such as bushfires, the COVID-19 pandemic, or flooding. This is due to council not being the lead agency in these situations, and instead directing residents back to the main source of information, such as the Vic emergency website. Council also promotes from time to time non-council events, images or stories on its social media platforms that are not housed on council's website. For a similar reason as before, we always link to the main agency or host for residents to get more information.
Thank you, Caroline. And that response will be sent back to Mr. Kowalski. Thank you very much. The next question was from Mr. Andrew Neal, Principal of Baxter Grammar. It's a two-part question, one leading to the other. Mr. Bazoodenhout, do you wish to respond to that, please?
Can I just ask a question?
Yes, sorry, Councillor Tatchell.
Mr. Mayor, I just before we go into it, just want to clarify that none of the information within this question form part of our confidential report.
CEO?
No, I do not believe so.
Good point. Thank you, Councillor Tatchell. Mr. Bazoodenhout.
The question from Mr. Neal relates to the plan scheme review, which is on tonight's agenda for consideration. The question is, can council please confirm if it will revise the management planning study area to include the educational precinct?
Thank you.
The response, the plan scheme review confirms the need for the management planning study as a key body of strategic work. It is the role of the management planning study to address the specific details of this work. Council does not propose to revise the study area boundaries to include the educational precinct. The follow-up question is, if not, Please advise the basis for excluding the educational precinct from the study area. So the study area for the Mattingly planning study is based on the area identified in the Bachusma's urban growth framework. The Mattingly planning study will consider the surrounding context beyond the study area, including the nearby sensitive users and more specifically the school. The Mattingly planning study will also consider the potential for mixed land uses in the study area in future.
Thank you, Mr. And so that answers parts 2 and that one. And again, that will be passed on to Mr. Neil. Okay, thank you. The next question is from Mr. Gerard Testro. Mr. Testro actually, similar to the same question asked by Mr. Downey, relates to the same matter. There was some background supporting documentation that they have supplied as well, councillors, which have been circulated to councillors, and that information will be incorporated into the minutes as well. So rather than read them all out, so I'll hand over to Mr. Jeffrey to respond to those 2 matters, 2 questions rather.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I might read all the questions out and provide one response because it's all related. That's okay.
Certainly.
So first question from Mr. Jared Testro is, can council advise when a drainage will be reinstated to ensure the water flow no longer impacts properties on the southern side of Hennessy's Road? Second question is, can council advise what action, if any, it is already taken, either permanent or temporary, to ensure the properties on the south side of Hennessy's Road don't experience any more impact of water damage from the road reserve due to excavation work? And a question from Mr. Greg Downey is, can council please advise what steps it has taken, if any, in the 3.5 years since consultation with residents to deliver on the commitment made to residents on the matter of Hennessy's Road Millbrook drainage issues? And the second question is, will the drain be reinstated to its original working order on Hennessy's Road at Millbrook? And in response, rather than read 4 responses out, I'll do one.
Certainly.
The investigation's been undertaken at the site. A project's been scoped and referred to council, the long-term capital works improvement program for consideration for funding.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffrey. And again, those responses will be sent through to Mr. Testro and Mr. Downey. Thank you. The next question is...
Mr. Mayor?
Sorry, Councillor Ward.
I was just listening to the questions there, Mr. Mayor, and I noticed that Mr. Downey pointed out that this was raised 3.5 years ago. I don't think a response stating that this will be referred to council's long-term capital improvement program for consideration is adequate. What does long-term capital improvement program mean? Can we actually give this a higher priority and actually give these residents an assurance that we can do this within a reasonable amount of time? But given they've been waiting for 3.5 years, I'm not comforted to hear that it's going to be referred to a long-term program.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Councillor Tatchell, your point?
Sure, that's how we'd approach that normally.
No, that's true. I'll let Mr. Jeffrey respond to that, Councillor Ward, with respect to what has happened to date. And I think it's probably let him respond to it. There has been some work done in this space. I'm well aware of it because I've met those gentlemen on site. So, Councillor, Mr. Jeffrey, please.
Yeah, I guess the issue is a little bit more complicated than the simple questions that are put here. But in relation to referring a long-term capital works program, our maintenance budgets are insufficient maintenance budgets to undertake works immediately. And we have numerous requests like this across the Shire that the mechanism to refer the capital program is to list them all and prioritise them all. And then the priorities get, the higher priorities will get funded because it's not an unlimited budget that we have.
Councillor Edwards.
Subsequent, if I may, Mr. Mayor. So what you're suggesting is this would be considered at this year's budget discussion?
That's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffrey. Councillor Ward, does that answer your question, please?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Mr. Stephen Derrick. And again, Mr. Zudenhout, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The question relates to agenda item 12.1, plan scheme review again. In relation to the proposed strategic direction 4, does the proposed action include groundwater resources, and if not, why not? So once again, the plan scheme review confirms the need for a future body of strategic work relating specifically to water supply, catchment and waterway protection, and that is strategic direction 4. The full scope of this strategic work will be determined upon commencement of the work. It is reasonable to expect that groundwater resources should be considered due to the interaction between surface water and groundwater.
Thank you, Mr. Burnett. And the second question from Mr. Derrick, please.
The second question also related to plan scheme review. In relation to proposed strategic direction number 3, does the proposed action include a review of the Shire's current strategic plan, which includes an objective to minimise environmental impact and its environmental strategy, to protect biodiversity and improve the condition and increase connectivity to native vegetation? And if not, why not? Once again, the planning scheme already contains state and local policy objectives and strategies relating to the protection of biodiversity and native vegetation. But once again, in strategic direction 3, significant landscape review, and strategic direction 9, the vegetation protection overlay conflict will include consideration of biodiversity values and the review of additional vegetation that may warrant the application of the vegetation protection overlay. And then also the open space policy or strategy currently being prepared will consider opportunities to protect and enhance native vegetation in a connected network of open space.
Thank you, Mr. Burnett. And that response will also be sent through to Mr. Derrick as well, so we'll have a fulsome response. So thank you for that one. The next question was from Mr. and Mrs. Fisher. Again, this relates to a later agenda item on the business paper. And I'll just over to Mr. Jeffrey, please.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. The question from Mr. and Mrs. Fisher is in relation to agenda item 12.2. I would like to know what your stormwater diversion plan is, as the pipes are clearly not diverting the water as effectively as the channel used to. Background information to that is the piping of the irrigation channel through Bacchus Marsh and the properties at Raglan Street and Dundas Street now being flooded because that channel's been filled in. Council has investigated the issue and is designing a drainage solution that will be referred to the long-term capital works program for implementation.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffrey. Councillor Edwards.
Mr. Mayor, if I may. Mr. Jeffrey, we've had a number of complaints now in different areas across the Shire with this project. Is there any process that the Southern Rural Water are required to go through with council to determine the effects of filling in the channel?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have had conversations with Southern Rural Water. I guess the channel's been there for such a long time. It's acted as a bit of a drainage channel as well, but that's not its actual function. I guess any inadequacies in the stormwater system have been hidden because that channel's been in place, and now that's been removed. That overland flow is just flowing straight across into people's properties. So, yeah, we have an obligation to make sure our stormwater network is functioning like it should as well.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Jeffrey. Again, there was some background information which has been disseminated to councillors from Mr. and Mrs. Fisher, and that will sort of form part of the minutes as well. So just the background information. Thank you very much, councillors. That's no more question time. We'll move on to item 8, petitions, which there are nil. Item 10 is presentation and deputations. Mr. Sibo, there are none? No. Thank you. Chief Executive Officer reports. Nil. Okay. Councillors, the next item is item 12.1. We have, that's the Moorabool planning scheme adoption. We have no speakers to that item. Councillors, I'm in your hands. There's obviously a fairly detailed attachment to this document. So I'm in your hands, councillors. Councillor Tatz, a question? Or?
Ask a question if I may, Mr. Mayor. Being that this is a fairly complex document, as you already noted, Mr. Mayor, and the fact that we have a number of new councillors on board at present who probably have not seen the workings of council in terms of these amendments and in terms of these planning schemes, and it's been limited with the Christmas break in terms of briefings. My concern, Mr. Mayor, and this may be a question for the new councillors, do they feel fully briefed enough to understand the fairly hefty document that was placed in front of them to be making a decision on it?
I guess that's a question that only those new councillors can actually answer. And I guess it's up to them whether they feel they've had adequate briefings on it. Have been. Councillor Ward, you have your hand up there, please?
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to read the document in detail, and I've actually referred a number of questions back to officers, and I've been quite satisfied with the responses I've been given. And given the recommendation is that the council should refer the submissions to a planning panel, I'm more than comfortable to support the recommendations as outlined in this recommendation.
Okay. Councillors, Councillor Berry?
Well, I'd actually like to speak. I did read it all. I was sat up very late reading everything, and it is quite complex. Councillor Paul Tatchell has said, and yeah, if I had a little bit more backward history, past history, it might help to make that reasonable decision.
Okay, Councillor Munari and then Councillor Edwards, please.
I agree, and I think that maybe has in some of the past briefings on this topic, were all the reports received from the officers to the councillors?
My understanding they were, yes.
In relation to one where it showed the differences of the changes.
I'll have to defer to Mr. Basudnell and Ms. Kernahan.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we provided two reports. So one is the stage 1 report, which is the literature review together with the feedback from the community. We also provided the stage 2 report, which is basically the strategic directions, which has outlined all of those directions together with a proposed action plan for consideration. So those were provided as part of the documentation.
Councillor Edwards, you had a question, please, or a query?
I was just going to ask, we had how many briefings did we have on this? We've had a few. 2 or 3, at least 2.
So the last briefing was 27 January, and then we distributed some of the documentation to councillors together with a PowerPoint presentation and opportunity for any questions.
Councillors, I'm in your hand. Councillor Ward?
I can concur with what Henry said, and that second report that outlined the changes and the summary or the commentary for those changes outlining the basis for those changes was extremely helpful to me to understand what was being proposed. So I certainly support that Henry did submit those documents.
Okay.
I'll move the recommendations.
We have a mover with the recommendations on point 1 and 2. Councillor Edwards, you're a seconder?
Second.
Councillor Dudzik, seconder. Are there any dissent? I'll put that. All those in favour? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, councillors. The next item is item 12.2. We have 2 submissions that have come in, neither of whom are not speaking. I think they have been disseminated to council. One is from Mr. Stephen Kelly, who is an objector to item 12.2, and also Mr. Arthur Chapman, again an objector to that particular matter. Their issues have been sort of, particularly Mr. Kelly's, there's a very long detailed study, report, and which will all councillors have a copy of, assuming that. Mr. Kelly, having read out, I think given the number of questions and that, I think this will form part of the basis on the councils have a question with respect to any of those matters that Mr. Kelly has raised. Or any officers, perhaps. Councillor Dudzik, please.
Can the statements have been provided to us? Can they be included with the submissions?
The minutes and that, yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, you're sort of suggesting go.
We actually put these in as submissions with the rest.
I'm assuming they would feed in the submissions to the panel review, would they? Okay. They'll be taken on board as part of the submissions to that as part of that normal planning process. that's what you're suggesting, I think that's a good idea. Councillors, any questions or queries on that? And again, Mr. Chapman has done the same there, again, a detailed response to it. And again, that will feed into the process as well. I think that'd be fair and reasonable. Have that noted? Yep. Okay. Councillors okay with that? Next speaker was Miss Kerry Homan from Melbourne Water. I think Kerry's online. Kerry's up on the screen now. And again, there was a map which has been circulated to councillors. And I think Ms. Homan was sort of speak to that. So I'll hand over to you, Kerry, please. You hear us? You're on mute.
Unmute. That's the famous saying for the past year. Hello and thank you for hosting me. My name's Kerry Homan. I'm the team leader of Catchment Strategies and Services at Melbourne Water. And so again, I'd like to thank you for providing me with the opportunity to provide the councillors with Melbourne Water's summary briefing on item 12.2. Now, apologies, I'm not sure what Rod has gone through prior to myself, so some of this might be a little bit of a repeat. But the proposed amendment C91 is an introduction of flood overlays into the council planning scheme. And we do that in our role as within Melbourne Water as a waterway, floodplain and drainage management authority for the Port Phillip and Western Port catchment. And that's under section part 10 of the Water Act. We are also a referral authority under section 55 of the Planning and Environment Act for planning permit applications within this special building overlay and the land subject to inundation overlays. And they're both flood overlays that represent drainage or underground flooding and waterway flooding in the 1 in 100 year flood event. Planning overlays are a primary and essential component of our flood management approach. They ensure that new development is appropriately designed to minimise risk, including flood damage, off-site impacts, and waterway and floodplain protection. A little bit about the mapping methodology that informed the flood extent that has been exhibited. Melbourne Water, we have complete confidence that the flood extents generated to inform the boundaries of the flood maps are fit for purpose. The flood modelling projects were commenced in 2010 and went through to about 2013, I believe. And they identify at a high level flood-prone areas that need to be taken into account when new development occurs. And typically they would trigger a planning permit development referral to Melbourne Water. A little bit of technical detail, the flood modelling methodology adopted was using 2Flow and RORB, and both those are considered internationally to be best practice software methodology. Importantly, Moorabool Shire, during the process and the latter part of this process, also engaged an independent flood modelling consultant to review our mapping and modelling. And based on that review and with some minor recommendations, we have since updated that modelling again, and that's what's currently been exhibited more recently. Noting that there is one minor change, and it has been raised by I think a couple of objectors in this process, that the data that was used for the Balan Township flood study, which I believe took place in 2011, predated the completion of some of the civil works that occurred with subdivision development, but Melbourne Water has agreed to review that flood shape in the vicinity, in particular of Lay Court, prior to a panel hearing. And so in summary, the benefits: Moorabool planning scheme does not currently include flood risk information. And this is where I'd like to probably draw your attention to the plan that was provided. Obviously in our flood management district, we service 38 council areas. And not having that flood risk information in the planning scheme, it means that development doesn't consider the risk around flooding at the beginning of that process. Informed development and investment decisions should be made in the early development phase, reducing the likelihood of potential appeals, redesigns, costs and delays in the development planning process. Including flood risk information into council planning schemes is a long-term preventative measure in reducing flood impact. And it's obviously one of many measures to deal with flooding. There's also a strong strategic basis referenced in state planning policy to identify and include flood risk information in planning schemes. And Melbourne Water has extensive experience and strong understanding of the management of flood risk. And based on that map there, you can see that the blue represents flood information in current planning schemes. And we work through an ongoing process with councils to update that information. The red represents, and I will note that the map is slightly out of date. The red represents areas not covered in planning schemes, but since this map, we've updated Bass Coast, Mornington Peninsula, and we're currently working with Macedon and Wyndham to do the same. So we are really confident that the information that forms the basis of this amendment represents the best information available. And we are confident that with Council's support, if we can run through the amendment process in its entirety, that the independent panel hearing will recommend its adoption. And to further ensure the success of this amendment, Melbourne Water is committed to providing resourcing, technical expertise and funding support to Council as required. So I'd just like to say, finally, I'd really recommend that the exhibited amendment be referred to an independent panel for further review. Thank you.
Thank you, Kerry. Thanks for your presentation. It would have been a little more helpful if the map was just Moorabool, because given the broad catchment you cover, it just sort of it's hard to sort of get a good read on it from our point of view. But thank you very much for your presentation. Any questions of Councillor Tatchell, please?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I noted in the presentation that the completion was 2013. There was an update.
Yes.
My question is, how old is the update, or when was it last updated? And because we have had unprecedented growth and changes through development throughout the region, have they been taken into consideration?
Kerry, did you actually get the question from Councillor Tatchell regarding updating of the information? You're on mute.
You're on mute.
Mute. Sorry, still on mute, Kerry.
Sorry, I did hear that question. Thank you. In terms of that update, I believe the peer review that was commissioned by Council was undertaken in approximately 2017 to 2018, and Rod might be able to provide a specific date on that. And some of those changes that were updated as part of that peer review were included, but I believe that lay court in particularly in a couple of areas in Balan that have since been developed may not have been included. And that's why we're committing to actually doing that update prior to any panel process and willing to make those changes to the exhibited extent within that time frame. And as you can imagine, the catchments are developing at an ongoing rate. And as part of, once the information is contained within a planning scheme, we do regular updates to remove that flood extent for those properties that are redeveloped and are no longer flood impacted.
Okay. Supplementary question, Councillor Tatchell.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. So on that basis, I suppose it's interesting that we mentioned Balan and Lay Court. There's obviously been a development in that region on the other side of the river or creek or waterway, whatever it might be at the back there.
Yeah.
Will this affect developments that are already in train, where developers have spent a considerable amount of money over a long period of time, because these things don't take 3 weeks, they take years. Will that impact those developers that are doing that work now? So.
Thank you. Kerry, you want to answer that, please?
Yeah, thank you. From my understanding is that with the major developers, particularly those doing greenfield subdivisions, the large subdivision extents, we do work with them very closely. And that is aside from planning overlays being in place to ensure that new development isn't impacted by flooding. So that should be actually occurring now. So I would say that as a result of the planning permit referral process, the planning scheme amendment process, that a developer should not be put at any detriment to the work or the permits that they currently have in flight.
Okay.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Councillor Tatchell.
So I suppose the next question is there if a development's been already done post 2018, is there a knock-on effect on the basis that a new development may comply, but a development that's in train may have a knock-on effect from the flood, by not having a flood overlay at present, but now may have an issue due to the development. So there would be some form of knock-on effect, I would assume.
Okay. Kerry, did you get that question from Councillor Tatchell regarding this development and the knock-on effect that could ensue?
I did, and I'll try to answer that in understanding the question. So that there should be no detrimental impact because there is now a planning scheme in place. Obviously, there will always be properties that haven't had requirements set upon them because they haven't been in an overlay, and they will not be necessarily built to be flood protected, whereas the new ones will be. So there'll always be that difference. It's a timing difference, really. In terms of any impact to the property that mightn't have the flood overlay on them and didn't have conditions, so it may be likely that there would be some development occurring across the catchments that may have development that haven't considered to be flood prone. The only point in time we do catch some of these subdivisions or some of these developments occurring are through the building permit process, but that's often at the end of the process. Okay,
thank you, Kerry. Mr. Davison, do you wish to sort of respond to Councillor Tatchell's query about the updates? You want to sort of perhaps respond to that, please, Mr. Bissonhouse?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to add to the comment, so in the absence of an overlay, we still refer those developments to Melbourne border, but they don't have section 52 referrals, so they're not determining authority referrals. So we do ask their advice. It's also a principle that we apply that any new development needs to take into account the pre-development as well as the post-development runoff. So any new development that takes place can't increase the runoff beyond the pre-development scenario. In relation to Lake Court, we specifically picked up on that, and the council report are very transparent. We flagged that in the council report, and we do recommend that should this go to a panel, that information will be updated. It will form part of the process that's considered by the panel. All the submissions will also go to the panel, so all those concerns that's raised and anything that may have been missed will be picked up through the panel process as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Kerry. Thanks very much for your presentation. Councillor Tadzik, please.
I have a question through the Mayor. The Speaker referred to someone called Rod twice, expecting us to know what he was meant to have said to us. Who is he talking about and what is he meant to have told us?
Yeah, Rod.
Well, Mr. Davison and Mr. Basuden had actually answered the question on his behalf. Mr. Davison is the strategic planner who's been...
so it's Rod.
Indeed.
Okay.
We do love you, Rod.
Thank you, councillors. Is there any questions of officers or anything before? And we have a recommendation there on page 22 in 3 parts.
Mr. Mayor.
And thank you, Councillor Edwards. Is there a seconder to that, please? Is there a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Ward. Are there any dissent or any opposition to that motion? Put that, all those in favour? Carried. Thank you, councillors. Next item of business is the revised terms of reference for the Active Ageing Advisory Committee. So there's a recommendation on page 38. Any questions on the matter? Yes, councillor.
I'll move it with a question if I may.
Okay, we'll move it with a question.
Yeah. I appreciate the fact that we have to revisit this. How are you, sir? I appreciate the fact that we have to revisit this. I suppose my question is are we going to be strong enough to keep this going? That's my concern. Is it does take a lot of resources, and we've had probably a bit of a mass fallout, or maybe it didn't work as well as we'd hoped. I suppose in the old vernacular, are we flogging a dead horse?
Thanks for the question to you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Ms. Jones.
I think part of the issue was the terms of reference. So the previous terms of reference may not have been clear enough to the advisory group or the committee of what the role was. Certainly conversations had with the committee last year indicated that they had a different idea of what their purpose was and what their powers were within that. So that conversation has been had with the committee, and the people have decided it's no longer for them, have advised that they they're no longer interested, and that the terms of reference they felt did not clearly illustrate to them what their role was. So we think that and this has been developed, the new terms of reference has been developed with that group, and they're quite happy with that, and that's why we're bringing it to council. They're happy for us to present it.
Councillor Tatchell.
Can I have a supplementary? I have Sally at the podium. So should we put a time frame on this in the hope that the new terms of reference will solidify? Because I think it's a very important thing, and I know how much effort the staff has put into trying to get this off the ground and make it work, and I think it's very important as well. But do you think we should put a time frame on it, because it does use a lot of resources?
So, Mr. Mayor, is there a time frame on the committee?
Yeah, whether it's successful or not.
I think that it's important to review all committees annually anyway, and ask for them to review it. We would be asking them to review it themselves. However, in saying that, part of the role of the committee is for the implementation of the updated Age Well Live Well strategy, and I would imagine that one of the actions will be to do that, to measure the effectiveness of the committee through that.
Thank you, Ms. Jones.
Councillor, I'll move it.
Okay, well, it's not qualified moving now.
Unqualified, maybe.
Okay, can I have a second for that, please? Councillor Duzzy. Any opposition? I'll put that. All those in favour? Carried. Thank you. The next item of business is 13.2, Domestic Wastewater Management Plan. Mr. Gaze, any questions, council, on this particular matter? Any questions of Mr. Gaze? Okay, we have a recommendation there in two parts. Does somebody wish to move that way? Move councillor Tatchell, second to councillor Edwards. Is there any dissent? Put that. All those in favour? Carried. Thank you, Mr. Gaze.
Can I just say, Mr. Mayor, before Mr. Gaze leaves, it's a big body of work I've seen done there, and it's a good outcome which will reduce the burden on council and improve safety outcomes of the community.
Okay, well, yes, correct, Councillor Edwards has a lot of work done. I congratulate the staff for all their work done in that space. It's been a mammoth undertaking, and one that does sort of stand us in good stead going forward. Thank you very much. Next item of business is item 14.1, the December 20 quarterly financial report and mid-year council budget review. And again, there is a recommendation on page 45. And any questions on this, councillors? Councillor Tatchell?
Yeah, I'll move it. And if I could ask a question as well, Mr. Mayor. I assume this year's budget will be far more complex than what we normally have due to the COVID situation. So my question would be, in terms of where we land on this, or how much time do we actually have before we need to have this our full budget submitted, and what date is that due by, and will we get enough briefing in time to get to there?
Mr. CEO?
I pass through to our CFO, if that's okay.
I suppose my question, Mr. Mayor, is will we require an extension based on where we seem to be behind anyway? So,
yeah. Mr. Evalia?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Mayor, through you, we've actually got a number of sessions over the next couple of weeks with council to go through the draft budget for 21-22. We've got a briefing session next week to go through some of the high level introduction to the 21-22 budget, and note we've got a planning day scheduled for the 20th of March. We've also got some overflow sessions scheduled for April. At this stage, I don't anticipate we're going to require an extension to the budget, and as per legislation, we have to adopt by the 30th of June.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
We have a mover, Councillor Tatchell. Is there a second?
Can I have a
Does it question? Yes, please.
I just would like to ask, through the Mayor, to the CEO, we're reviewing the budget. When can we expect to get a report on the effects of COVID-19 on our budget? And when will the COVID-19 policy be released so people not know what happened to the rate rise that was meant to be set aside for assisting residents affected by COVID-19?
Mr. CEO?
Mr. Mayor. Those funds have been isolated from council spending. So those funds that you referred to as around the increase have been isolated. I think from a council's point of view, council have been waiting to see the impact in particular of the final instalment, which was due in February. We would be anticipating we will take it initially to a briefing in March and then possibly to a council meeting in April. And that's when a decision will be made by council as to how those funds will be allocated.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. We have a mover, Councillor Tatchell. Is there a seconder, Councillor Dudzik? Is there any dissent? I'll put that all those in favour. Carried. Thank you. The next item of business is the item 14.2, advisory committees of council reports. Three sets of minutes there for council for.
Happy to move.
With Councillor Dudzik, seconder. Councillor Berry. Is there any dissent? I'll put that. All those in favour? Carried. Thank you. The next item is item 14.3, delegated committees of council. The recommendation there for the Development Assessment Committee of 2016, 16th of December 2020, and the Moorabool Growth meeting of the 2nd of September 2020.
Happy to move.
Move Councillor Dudzik, the seconder. Move Councillor Minari.
Got a question?
Yes,
please.
Yes.
I just probably a matter of process is I note that the council last November, it might have been December, there was a decision of council to have the meetings in particular places or certain places over the journey of this year, and we've not brought it back to council yet. We've moved our council meetings. Do we need to instigate a process so that to allow for the change of meeting venue based on the COVID issue and all sorts of issues? So,
yeah.
I'll have to take that on notice. The reasoning for why the meetings are currently in their situation at the moment is really got to do with the technology at this moment in time. But I'll have to take on notice and follow up regarding do we need to amend anything.
So council will get advice in that space. This is a good point made from a governance point of view. Okay, we have a mover and a seconder. Any opposition? I'll put that. All those in favour? It's carried. Next item is item 14.4. 2017-21 Council Plan Second Quarterly Progress for October to December 2020. And again, there was an attachment of the if you like. Move Councillor Tatchell, seconder. Councillor Minari. Is there any dissent? I'll put that. In favour? It's carried. Thank you. The next item of business is item 15.1, and we did receive additional information. This is in response to petition response, Donald Street, Bacchus Marsh. And councillors, we did receive some information just the meeting started with some photos of the street curbing channel along that particular section of roadway. So I hope council have had a chance to actually review that. Again, there is a recommendation on page 54, which is yes, Councillor Dudzik, please.
Through the mayor, is it our long-term capital program? It goes for quite a while. Would this item be coming up in this year's capital improvement program, or how far down the capital program would it be?
I'll just, Mr. CEO.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll ask Phil to that response.
Mr. Mayor, I guess there's a lot of drainage issues out at the moment, given the wet summer we've had, and there's been a lot of investigations and recommendations made. I guess as a heads up, we'll be probably recommending a lot of drainage works in next year's capital program because they do risk property. So yeah, because of that risk, they'll be probably elevated above some of the other items on the long-term list. Okay,
thank you. Councillors, there's a recommendation there. Somebody prepared to move that way, please. Councillor Tatchell, your seconder. That's it. Any opposition? I'll put that. All those in favour? It's carried. Thank you. Next item of business, 15.2, draft road management plan 2021-2025. And again, councillors, there is a recommendation at the bottom of page 59. Are there any questions, please? Councillor Edwards.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. So at the council briefing, there was a number of issues raised. Will that be taken on as consultation as part of this? I know we haven't made any changes since that point in time, but will that be considered during that consultation phase?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, exactly. It'll all form part of the consultation period and will be incorporated into the
subsequent that.
Yes, Councillor Edwards.
Just through due process. If we are to take on some of those changes, are we better to do that before we go to public consultation so that people understand some of those changes?
From talking to the officers, they didn't feel as if they were significant enough. So they felt it could be incorporated and it wouldn't materially change the document.
Give us that.
Council, we have a recommendation there. Somebody wish to move the recommendation. Councillor Dudzik, a seconder, please. Councillor Berry. Any objections? Put that. All those in favour? It's carried. Thank you. The next item of business is item 15.3, draft management and maintenance of unmade paper roads policy. Councillor Tatchell.
Yeah, I'll move it, Mr. Mayor, but I'd like to ask a question.
Certainly.
As was discussed at the briefing, and I'll just acknowledge Lace's work on this one. It's a good report and it makes sense and it's easy to read. But my issue is still the same today. I know we're only laying it on the table. But the problem is that when we have paper roads, there's two issues really. When we have paper roads, there are no benefit to landholders that present a problem in terms of our weed control. And some of these paper roads are fairly old and fairly large and go for long stretches. That I note that there's a CFA trigger that will allow us to react and do something about that land. But there's still no trigger for the weed displacement, and especially when it affects agricultural land on both sides of that particular paper road. And my second, I don't know whether you want them both at once, it's probably easier.
They're probably doing both.
My second issue is this: when we have paper roads that people use for, may not be a direct benefit, but maybe for access, and they do works to those roads, and then it has a knock-on effect to other properties that hasn't been there in the past, who takes responsibility, the developer or the council, in terms of the fact that we own it and it is a paper road?
Mr. CEO?
I have to pass that one across to...
Sorry, Phil.
Mr. Jeffrey?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. In terms of the first one with the weeds, I might take that on notice because I guess there's some responsibility of landowners on roadsides as well, and I guess an unmade road would be similar to that. So I might just take that on notice and clarify that in a briefing note if that's okay.
Could I add to that, Mr. Mayor, just if we're going to take it on notice, that on a lot of occasions this may adjoin a number of properties that all have different reasons for being. So the complication, of course, is who does it benefit and who does it create a problem for, because some may be agriculture on one side of the paper road and the others may be just clear housing. And if it's certain noxious weeds that has an issue with the agriculture, it has a far more dramatic effect and harder to maintain or to fix than say someone that has a 50-metre backyard frontage, which we have a few of those. So if I can take that on notice, Mr. Mayor, and get some sort of response back. But other than that, I'm happy to move
Yes. The second question was if someone builds a track on the road reservation, we would treat that as akin to a driveway, I guess, and we wouldn't go to maintain that road. And this policy, I guess, outlines the criteria that we would assess what's brought onto our road register. There are a lot of little tracks and like have been built over the years that we don't maintain. So yeah, those types of things we would classify as a driveway. It just sits on the road reservation.
Kind of supplementary to that. Yes, sorry, Mr. Mayor, to labour it. I suppose the issue that normally comes around is when it's compacted and used as a temporary roadway, that we end up with another drainage problem that may not have been there in the first place, because a paper road not only is not being built as a road, it's certainly not being drained. So it creates that knock-on effect to properties that are joining into fences and things like that. Do we need to include this in some sort of policy to protect those people?
Mr. Jeffrey?
So here, Mr. Mayor, it's a good question. I guess each circumstance is different when someone builds a road. I guess if they, or does works, if they, I think we just have to take each one on its merits. If someone makes a complaint, we have to investigate and work through the issues at the time. Because I don't think there's a blanket approach you could take to something like this.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And we will get a briefing note with respect to that point that Councillor Catchum requested about the responsibility obligations on landowners for weed control. We have a mover, Councillor Tatcher, seconder for this, please. Councillor Minari. Any objections? Yes, do you object? Oh, sorry.
Also, those in favour?
Sorry. That's okay. No, if no objection, I'll put that lies in favour. Thank you. The next item of business is item 15.4, the draft asset management policy. And again, there's a recommendation to receive the draft.
Happy to move that, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Tatchell. Second for that, Councillor Berry. Are there any objections? I'll put that. All those in favour? Carried. Thank you. Item, no other reports. Nil. Item 17, notices of motion. Nil. Item 18, notices of rescission. Nil. Item 19 is the Mayor's report, which hopefully has been circulated to and yeah, which is basically what I've been attending with officers and other councillors over that journey. So I'll just tender that for receival, please. Councillor Tatchell.
I'll move it if you like.
Thank you, Councillor Berry. Any opposition? Put that. All those in favour? It's carried. Thank you. Councillor reports. I'll start on my left if that's okay. Councillor Edwards, any councillor reports, please?
Yeah, just one brief one for officers' awareness. I attended the Blackliston Forge committee meeting on last Monday night. And one of the issues they raised was with the development going behind them, is there an opportunity and what is the process for them to try and obtain a metre of land to protect the original building, because the foundation, new development will right into foundations. So I believe they have spoken about this, but they just want to make sure they're following what process.
Okay, Mr. Seah.
Pass over to
Mr. Sidney, please.
on this one.
Mr. Mayor, I don't have the details in front of me, but I know where the property is located, and there will be conditions required to protect that heritage building. So I can go back and look at original permits and history. And any new development will most likely have the same conditions imposed on them. And it is standard practice to consult the neighbouring properties.
No, thank you.
Any further council reports, Councillor Edwards?
No.
Councillor Minari, council report?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. I recently attended the MAV workshop for meeting procedures.
Thank you. Anything else to report?
No.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Tatchell, any reports? Council reports, please.
Well, I take your indulgence, Mr. Mayor, just to congratulate Cherie Graham on setting up that new system for the emergency management and the wonderful job she's done in a very short amount of time to comply with the new state government regulations in terms of how these are ran. But also, while I have the floor, just wondering, I know we've had a fairly safe summer in terms of fire risk. Just wondering, would it be a benefit to the new councillors to see the MEC in action at some point? Because I think a lot of people haven't seen what a wonderful system, and we lead the way, largely led by Cherie Graham in terms of our ability to start a control unit in the centre of the Moorabool Shire, and how quickly our staff can respond and put together an MEC. And I know I spoke to a councillor today that hadn't seen it, and it just seemed appropriate that they could actually see these things in action. I mean, those have been around for a while. We've seen it in action. In fact, we had one in the middle of a council meeting once where the place turned into a little bit James Bond. But I just thought it'd be appropriate to see the work that's being done behind the scenes.
So is that something that perhaps could take up?
I'm happy through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to take that on notice and try and arrange it. I think now that hopefully some of the restrictions are being removed, that I think would be more accessible to be able to arrange those kind of things.
Okay, thank you. Any further councillor reports, councillor Tatchell?
No, thanks, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Ward, any councillor report, please?
I've met with various local sporting clubs to discuss some recreational plans. And I've drafted, obviously, a notice of motion for an upcoming meeting about consideration of future facilities. I did a very worthwhile tour with Councillor Edwards to look at some concerns we share about illegal rubbish dumping throughout the council, which is going to be something for future discussion. Today I attended the MAV training course on discrimination, bullying and sexual harassment, which was very worthwhile. And on Friday I'll be representing Moorabool at the VLGA's leadership program in Melbourne. So I'm looking forward to that.
Okay, thank you, councillor. Anything else to report, councillor Ward?
No, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Berry, any councillor report, please?
Yes, thank you. Through the Mayor, 8th of February, I attended a community information session at the Bacchus Marsh Golf Club re the AusNet Towers campaign. It was good to see there was 122 people, community people, residents living in the area that also attended. Got great support. On the 11th of February, I attended the Barista Blue launch. Councillor Tonya Dudzik was also there. That's a great recognition to work Jim Ross is doing in the area and has done prior with all other projects through the Blue Light area. Constable Jim Ross, I should say, or leading senior constable Jim Ross. On the 26th of February, a whole day trip to the Grampians area for the Grampians Central West Waste Local Government Waste Forum. It's a long tongue twister there, in Ararat with the Mayor. Tom had the pleasure of myself being in his car and I got a lot of information out of that. Didn't know there was so many conversations could be had around waste, so learnt lots. And that evening then attended the BMACI or Bacchus Marsh Arts Council Incorporated Dare to Dream exhibition. It's on currently at the old ambulance building in the main street in Bacchus Marsh, and they've done some amazing work. There's over 40 regional artists there that have put on a magnificent display.
Thank you, councillor Berry. Councillor Dudzik, any councillor reports, please?
Mine's a little bit similar to Councillor Berry's. On the 8th of Feb, I attended the community information session at the Bacchus Marsh Golf Course about the overhead power lines. It was very well organised by the community group that ran it. Lots of information, so well done to them. On the 11th of Feb, I attended the launch of Barista Blue. Well done to Jim Ross and Blue Light and Victoria Police who are behind that initiative, and well done to everyone involved. And on last Friday, the 26th, I attended the opening of the BMAC Gallery in Bacchus Marsh, and they did say that they're looking for someone to donate the building to them. So if you know any wealthy people who might be interested in buying the ambulance station and donating it to the Bacchus Marsh Arts Council, they'd be most appreciative. And they'd also appreciate this state government considering that option as well.
Thank you, councillor Dudzik. Any further matters on council? Councillor Dudzik, is that it?
That's it, thank you.
Somebody move the council reports be received. Councillor Tatchell.
Could I ask a question too, just in relation to one of the reports, if I may, Mr Mayor? On the illegal dumping, is it the question I was asked today, actually. I know some of this is coming out of Melbourne and out of building sites. If somebody dumps it on the roadside property because it's not fenced, but it's a private property and it's on the verge as well, who's responsible? Is it a council or is it the person who owns the property?
Mr CEO. Mr Jeffrey, please.
Yeah, Mr Mayor, any dumping on the roadsides, traditionally council has gone and cleaned up that rubbish. Prior, we would normally try and investigate, if we could track down who has dumped the rubbish, but that's almost impossible to do in most cases.
I suppose the question is, though, if it's dumped and the place isn't fenced and it's on our roadside, but it obviously spills onto the private property as well, are we responsible or are they, or?
If it was remained on the road preserved, we would clean it all up in my.
Thank you.
Thank you. The report, Councillor Tatchell's moved that council reports be received. Is there a second to that, Councillor Edwards? Hopefully there's no dissent. I'll put that. All those in favour? It's carried. Thank you. Councillor, as per our local meeting law, the next item of business is urgent business. And as new local law dictates, I'll ask, does any councillor have any urgent business, and then go through the process of admission of urgent business to the meeting, which requires unanimous consent of the council. So are there any urgent business? I know Councillor Edwards has circulated something, so
I have two, Mr Mayor. One I don't believe requires a motion. I'll take advice from the CEO then. It's in relation to a number of complaints about unregistered motorcycles throughout our community that are becoming a major hazard.
Right, okay. So the other one that you have circulated?
The other one I have is in relation to the Community Strengthening Growing Suburbs Fund, authorising council put in an application for up to $5 million for 2 projects.
So that has been circulated, councillors, and Councillor Edwards has given a brief overview of what the nature of that is, which is required as per our local law. What I will now do is ask the councillors, do you accept this matter for urgent business? And I need to shut it. Any dissent? Okay, so councillor, yes, I'll put that. All those in favour? Okay, so that matter now has actually, the mover and seconder, sorry, I just jumped ahead a bit there. Councillor Edwards and Councillor Dudzik, okay, thank you. I'll put that. All those in favour? Thank you. Now, Councillor Edwards, you wish to now put your motion, please.
Yeah, so the first one I don't think requires a motion. I just want to, we've had in the last 3 to 4 weeks numerous complaints about unregistered motorcycles utilising council's tracks through along the Werribee River, where pedestrians are threatening people, including the new BMX track, where a parent had the 2 children with her with donuts. We don't need a motion to write to the local police to investigate and find out where we're at. We did provide, I believe, Councillor Sullivan, a motorcycle many years ago.
So the journey,
yeah. So just to find out if there's more that can be done to try and curb that pattern.
Yep. Okay, I'm happy to do that. So just take that as a given. Now, your other matter of urgent.
Yeah, so the second one, Mr Mayor, if I may, I'll just give a little bit of background. As the Growing Suburbs Fund's reasonably new to our Shire. So since 2015, Growing Suburb Fund has provided over $325 million to the interface councils. So that's funding we haven't had access to, and they've been able to utilise that for all the issues associated with growth. The Peri-Urban Group over the last 5 to 7 years has advocated strongly to get access to that fund, and through our local representatives, we've been able to get access to the Growing Suburbs Fund. So this is quite a new financial stream for our council, and as such, councillors have done a review and provided 2 projects that they've deemed worthy, noting that there was a really short time frame. So I believe we received it was in 27th of January, we actually received notification that we could apply, and we have to have it done before the next council meeting, which obviously gives our officers very little time to prepare a full report. Hence, this has been entered in urgent business. So the motion is actually that council authorise the CEO to submit an application for round 2 of the Growing Suburbs Fund for the amount of $5 million to support delivery of the West Mattingley Early Years Hub and the Bacchus Marsh Bowling Club projects.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Berry. Mr CEO, I think you had something to add to this too, didn't you, a bit with the requirement, one of the requirements for this application?
To you, Mr Mayor. So it is a little bit unusual the way we're approaching this, but it's really got to do with the timeframes. So there is no additional council funding required as part of this, unlike a lot of grant schemes. This is a fairly unique scheme and a fairly new scheme, as Councillor Edwards has expressed. And one of the conditions is that we do have to have approval of council to put the application in, and hence we have this in front of us today.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Tatchell?
Just a question to make sure both the projects, I assume, are both master planned and reasonably shovel ready.
that's one of the conditions of the grant scheme.
Okay. Councillors, we have a mover and a seconder. There's no dissent. I'll put that. All those in favour? It's carried. Thank you. Any other urgent business? Councillor
Yes.
Larry?
Through you, Mr Mayor. Can I seek council's indulgence to prepare a letter in regards to the poor internet service in our rural areas, particularly affecting school students, especially in this, these snap lockdown times, and also for local businesses. COVID-19 has presented many challenges over the last 12 months, and I just would like to request a letter to be written to the Minister for Communication, both state and federal, requesting an update on proposed improvements to our area.
Do you wish to have a formal motion to that effect, or just request the officers consider it?
Yeah, just request a motion, just a request a letter.
Through you, Mr Mayor, in addition to that, that is one of the priorities of the Central Highland region, is dealing with this internet black spot issue. So we do have a meeting this Friday, and I'll raise it in there.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Councillor Dudzik, you have a question?
Can we make sure that's for the whole of Moorabool Shire, including Long Forest?
We don't miss that.
Because I have terrible internet.
Thank you, Councillor. No, that will also be taken up.
Thank you.
Councillor Tatchell, any urgent?
No, Mr Mayor, thank you.
Councillor Berry?
No, I'm fine.
Councillor?
No urgent business.
Councillor Ward, sorry, because you're on this, apologies, it's just, okay, thank you very much. So thank you for that. There's no closed session, council? No? Thank you, councillors. Thank you for participation. Thank you, officers, in the preparation of the reports. All this runs smoothly because of your good work and the good work of